Hello, you have found yourself back at the Happy Horse Nutrition Podcast. I'm Dr. Nerida, PhD equine nutritionist, founder of the My Happy Horse Nutrition app, and someone who has listened to hundreds, if not thousands, of horse owners telling me how incredibly frustrating, expensive, and sometimes a little bit heartbreaking getting some weight on their horses can be. So today, we are talking about feeding for weight gain. Here is what I've noticed, even for myself. When a horse is too light, our instinct is usually to just feed more hard feed with more calories and more scoops in the feed bin. But weight gain is not always that simple. In fact, if we don't understand why a horse has lost weight in the first place, and if we don't set the gut up properly, we can end up pouring feed into a horse without getting the result we want. So in this episode, I'm going to walk you through the 5 key steps to feeding for safe, effective, long-term weight gain. We'll talk about why identifying the cause of weight loss matters, why the hindgut needs to become a fibre fermenting powerhouse, why a balanced diet is non-negotiable, where protein fits in, and how to add high energy ingredients without upsetting the gut or creating a fire-breathing dragon in the process. Because the goal is not just a fatter horse. The goal is a healthier horse with a better functioning gut, more stable behaviour, stronger top line, and condition that can actually be maintained long term. Before we jump in, if you enjoy the podcast, please hit follow in your podcast app. It really helps more horse owners to find the show, and it means you won't miss future episodes. So with that, let's get into it. I've been writing a couple of articles for online pet health in the last few weeks, one about feeding for weight gain and one about feeding for weight loss. And it's been interesting for me just thinking about the two different processes. And currently with the 6 horses here, little Miss Spotty has gone off to be loved by a 5-year-old girl, so she's not here anymore. But the 6 horses, I've got 4 being managed really closely in a track with strip grazing to keep weight off them, and the other 2, so Alay, the off the track, and Breezy, the very old mare that we have, she must be getting close to 40, on free access to pasture and not on weight gain diets, but they're certainly being fed to maintain their weight, and there's no issues with them having too much condition. So I live both sides of this problem every day. And it's interesting to think about which is the best situation. I mean, feeding for weight gain is certainly the more expensive situation, but it's so much more satisfying. And I will do a whole podcast as well on feeding for weight loss, so keep your eye out for that one. It certainly has many frustrations, but feeding for weight gain can be very satisfying, or at least for me as a nutritionist, because I actually get to put some feed in a feed bin for these horses, as opposed to, really managing calorie intake and just trying to keep as much weight off the fatties that are in the track. It can also be a very frustrating process, and I have honestly watched so many people in the 25 years that I've been working as a nutritionist just really struggle with getting weight on horses and, feeding what you would think would put weight on and still not getting the result they want. So this podcast really just aims to go through 5 steps that I follow to get weight on horses. And the first step, let's start there. So the first step is always to identify the cause of weight loss. So if we are embarking on a weight gain journey for a horse, what I want to know straight up is, well, why is the horse in the condition that it's in? And sometimes it can be really simple. The horse was underfed, whether that was through negligence or whether it was just because a horse owner didn't realise how much feed that horse actually needed. It's a pretty simple and straightforward cause of a horse being underweight, and it usually ends up being reasonably simple and straightforward for putting weight back on those horses. But if we don't know the cause behind the weight loss, then we're unlikely to be able to correct that weight loss and have that horse put weight on unless we fix what's actually causing it in the first place. So a really obvious example of that would be if there's some sort of dental issue in the horse's mouth that you are unaware of, and the horse starts to lose weight, and you start to feed more or provide better access to pasture or whatever you might do to try and put weight on that horse, and the horse is not gaining weight because it's unable to chew. and therefore it's not actually eating nearly as much as what it needs to eat to maintain its body weight, let alone to gain weight. So tip here would be that if you have any horse that suddenly loses weight and you're not sure why, get a dentist, a veterinary dentist, to have a look in its mouth as quickly as possible, because often sort of sudden, unexpected and reasonably rapid weight loss will be something in their mouth. And I've seen all sorts of things, horses with sticks, pieces of tree lodged up in their mouth, or they'll have lost a tooth and then the tooth opposing it hasn't been able to be ground away, and so they end up with this weird pattern of tooth growth in their mouth, and then they're not able to chew properly. There's lots and lots. They can get cavities like we do, and then that causes pain for chewing. So if you have a horse that is losing weight and you're not sure why, first place to go would be look in their mouth. But there's lots of other, and it's not the intention to go through all of the causes of weight loss in this podcast, but there's lots of other reasonably obvious ones. So gastric ulceration is a big one. If you've got a horse that is ulcerated and then not eating as well as it should, that's really obvious if it's not eating its hard feed. It's maybe a little bit less obvious if it's not wanting to eat its pasture or hay as it normally would. So don't jump straight to an ulceration diagnosis, and preferably do get it diagnosed with a gastroscope. But it can be a cause of weight loss, particularly in performance horses and particularly in situations where they don't want to eat their hard feed, because if they're ulcerated, they've got open wounds in their stomach, and then if you are feeding them, say, quite a salty feed that might have salt or electrolyte added to it, that will cause pain in their stomach, and sometimes it's that will stop them from eating. And you might notice that if you have got an ulcerated horse and you stop putting salt or electrolyte in their feed, that their appetite will actually improve, which is something you can try if you've got an ulcerated horse on treatment but struggling to get it to eat. Another one might be back or neck pain. So if it's actually painful for them to put their head down and graze, or if you've got horses feeding, heaven forbid, out of raised hay feeders, which are not ideal for horses for many reasons. But if you're getting horses to consistently lift their head and twist their head to get up to their hay, then that's potentially a cause of weight loss, because if they've got a painful neck, or if that's causing a painful neck, and they're not spending as much time as they need to consume the amount of hay they need to maintain their weight, then that will also be a cause of weight loss. And then if you don't fix that, it's not going to matter if you put more hay for them. They're not going to correct their weight loss if they're not actually comfortable while they're eating that hay. Another one can be a severe worm burden in young horses. So I have my beautiful Domino and Dellinger here, the two paints, and one of them is coloured like a paint, and the other one, Dellinger missed out on all the painty bits. She mustn't have been patient enough to stand in that line and actually get coloured in. But they came to me, or I bought them essentially to rescue them as 12-month-old yearlings, and they were really stunted. Dellinger, I must put a post about them up on our social media again, because it's such a cool story. So little Dellinger was just all dead coated. It was late October when I bought them. So, in the Southern Hemisphere, they should have had a nice, clean, new spring coat by then, but she was all dead coated, and you could see her ribs. She was probably a condition score somewhere between 2 and 3 on the Henneke 1 to 9 scale. So definitely ribby. Could see like her neck was U-shaped and her shoulders were sort of standing out. She wasn't a walking skeleton by any means, but she was thin. And Domino was a little better off. She was ribby as well. She was slightly better grown. She was a little bit more muscled, but you could see she was very, very underdone. They were about the size of weanlings when they were yearlings. And when I went to collect them, they were on a property that was just letting horses breed indiscriminately. There was colts running around with all the mares everywhere. And but what sort of had me a little bit baffled was they weren't starved, so there was feed there. And I remember thinking when I first picked them up, oh, it's interesting that they're in such poor condition. Well, the cause of that was pretty obvious once we could get our hands. They'd never been handled, so it was a little bit of an adventure getting them onto a truck and then handling them. And the wonderful Adam Sutton came and spent a few days with me and And, got first human hands on them. And I think we started working with them on a Monday afternoon. And on Wednesday morning, we walked them home from the yards we had them in back to my place. And it was like they'd been led around their entire life. They're just beautiful horses. And Adam did such a good job with them. But we wormed them on the second day. So we handled them just enough that we thought we could probably ask them if they'd have some drench, and we gave them a pretty gentle drench because we were worried about what might be in their gut. And their manure the next morning was full of worms, like you could see them. And I've never seen anything like it with my own eyes. So once we'd wormed them, and obviously I got them, onto decent pasture and a really well-balanced diet and all of those things, but once we wormed them, they just picked up, their coat improved, they started packing on weight. And I had been feeding them for maybe 2 weeks before we started handling them, and nothing had changed. So they hadn't put on any weight, even with the feed I was giving them in that time. And yet after we wormed them, man, they've just put on weight. Like, it's crazy seeing the photos of how quickly they got better. So in their situation, it would have been partly malnutrition because they had pasture, but they weren't getting any feed to help them grow as young horses. But I think a lot of it was that they were just losing so much of their nutrition, lots of their protein, a lot of their energy to the massive population of worms that were living in their gut because they'd never been wormed and they were running with so many horses. So if I hadn't figured that out and I hadn't wormed them, I could have been feeding them for a very long time and not get anywhere because the worm burden was, I think, the primary cause they were in such poor condition. So whenever you have a horse that either has lost weight and you're wanting to put the weight back on, or if the horse has come to you in poor condition and you're needing to put weight on them, then you need to identify the cause of that poor condition and then start to put weight on. There's lots of off the tracks within our community. We have our beautiful Allay here, and they're classics for coming to you reasonably light in condition and having to put condition on. And it is tempting to go, well, they're in poor condition because they've been in hard race training, and the diets that a lot of racehorses are fed in different parts of the world, but particularly here in Australia, can be pretty hard on them, and they can end up in reasonably light condition. But it is also important not to assume that that's the only thing that's going on. So still do full health check, have your vet go over them, make sure that the teeth are good. Definitely have their teeth done so that you rule out anything going on there. If you think they need gastroscoping, then do that and get on top of any gastric ulcers that might be in their stomach. Do a full workup of them and make sure that there's nothing obvious that's contributing to the weight loss before you make the assumption that it is just because they are off the track and we expect them to be in light condition, because you don't want to be 3 months down the track trying to put weight on a horse that's not putting weight on, only to realise that there was actually something going on with that horse that was preventing weight gain. So if we'll move on from here, because we could talk about that topic all day, really. There's lots and lots of things that stop horses from gaining weight, but we just have to make the assumption that we're on top of all of that. The horse is healthy. There is no reason why it can't eat or chew or access food. No health conditions that are holding it back. The second step, and easily the most important step to putting weight on horses, is to turn their hindgut into a fibre fermenting powerhouse. So what I mean by that is a majority of all horses' diet should be forage, and forage is very high in fibre. And then I also love to feed other fibres in horses' diets, which we'll talk about in a little while. And if you've been listening to the other episodes of the podcast, you will realise how much I do love fibres and how much I try to get you to think about feeding horses in terms of evolution, their 55 million years of evolution, and how their gut has sort of adapted to a very diverse, high fibre diet over millions of years. And if we can get a horse's diet to be as close to what evolution says they should be fed, then that's usually when we get the best results on every level for them. So best health, best performance, best welfare, everything goes really well when we can feed a horse in a way that honours their gastrointestinal tract, essentially. And with horses that need to gain weight, often what I'll find is that their hindgut is compromised in some way. And what I mean by compromised in some way is that they will have lost at least some of their fiber fermenting microbes in their hindgut, and they're critically important for weight gain. So all horses' diets should be forage-based. Forage is very high in fiber, and fiber is where the energy that forage contains is held. So when we feed forages to a horse, yes, they're providing some minerals and some protein, but the primary reason a horse eats forages is because of the energy that those forages contain. But that energy is useless to the horse if the horse doesn't have any way of actually extracting that energy from the forage. And horses, being mammals, actually have no enzymes and no natural capacity themselves to extract the energy from the forage. So just to take a step back here, all a weight gain diet is a diet that provides a horse with more energy than they strictly need. And then that excess energy they will lay down as condition and weight gain. And they can use that excess energy to drive protein, muscle protein production so that they get more muscle, as well as store excess energy as fat and put on condition. But to achieve weight gain, we need to feed more energy than the horse strictly needs. But it's pointless feeding more energy if the horse can't digest that energy. So if you are feeding a lot of forage to a horse that doesn't have a strong population of fiber fermenting microbes in their hindgut, they can't actually access the energy that's in that forage. And a lot of it will then end up in the manure on the ground, completely undigested. So this is why step number 2, this turning the hindgut into a fiber fermenting powerhouse, is so important, because if we don't have our horses set up so that they can extract every last ounce of energy out of the forage that you are feeding them, weight gain becomes much harder, because a bulk of what you are feeding them, so being forages, and then it could be pasture or hay or other different types of forages, but if a bulk of what you are feeding them is forage and they can't actually digest that forage, it makes it really hard to put weight on a horse. And this is why I'll talk about off the tracks a little bit throughout this podcast, because they're the classic horse that we think about, putting weight on. So if you think about an off the track, in race training, a lot of race horses are fed high grain diets. And often what that high grain diet does is it will cause starch to escape undigested from the small intestine and land in the hindgut. And then when it lands in the hindgut, it will ferment rapidly, and it will cause a buildup of volatile fatty acids as well as lactic acid. And then with the acid accumulation, the pH in the hindgut will drop. And when the pH drops, the fungi and the bacteria that love to ferment fiber for your horse will actually shut down. And if the pH gets low enough, so below a pH of 6.2, they will start to die. So when that happens to race horses in training, what actually happens is that they're losing a lot of their ability to extract energy from fiber. And then if you take those off the tracks and start to feed them a high forage diet, what you'll find is that they're not actually able to put much weight on a diet like that, because they don't have the workforce they need to extract their energy out of those fibers. So to turn the hindgut into a fiber fermenting machine, what we need to do is build up really strong populations of fiber-loving microbes. And to do that, it's not a difficult process, but it takes some patience. And this is probably the single hardest thing with weight gain diets, is we need to be patient for them to be effective long term. The thing with weight gain is we could take any horse that needed to put on weight and we could feed it lots of, an extruded grain feed and some lucerne or alfalfa hay, and that horse would put on weight if we just fed it a really high grain diet. But the problem is, as soon as you stop feeding the high grain amounts, they will lose weight again. Because if you try to then swap those horses that have put weight on high grain diets back to being on a high forage diet, all of a sudden they're in that situation where they don't have the hindgut microbes they need to extract the energy out of the forages and maintain weight. Whereas if you can be very patient and spend the first 1 to 6 months of your horse's weight gain journey just building up the hindgut microbes to put your horse in a position where they can extract energy from forages and fibers really efficiently, what you'll end up with is a horse that is able to maintain its weight really effectively on essentially a forage-based diet and be much, much less reliant on grains and hard feeds, supplementary feeds, fortified feeds, whatever we call it, all sorts of things all around the world. But your horse will be much less reliant on those fortified feeds. So I often see off the tracks, and the instinct, I guess, is real to want to put weight on that horse as quickly as possible. And it was really interesting for me when we first got a lay, and I had been asked by Racing Queensland to do the Queensland Off the Track Nutrition Hub video series. And in the first 2 videos, I talk about a lot about gut health, and then I talk about the first 12 months of a racehorse's journey off the track. And my advice in video number 2 was month 1, just feed pasture, hay, and a balancer pellet. And there's a little bit of oil and other things in there. For full details, I'll put the link to that video in the show notes for this podcast, or you can just Google Racing Queensland Off the Track Nutrition Hub. And that was my advice, was just pasture and hay and a balancer pellet, tiny little bit of oil, and that's it for the first month. And then from months 2 to 6, start to bring in some additional fibers just to try and build up the fiber diversity in the diet so that we can build up microbial diversity in the hindgut. And I struggled so much in that, especially in the first month, watching a lay and just thinking, oh my goodness, have I given people the right advice here? Because I was convinced she was going to lose weight. It was quite dry. We didn't have a lot of pasture, but I did have really nice quality hay, lucerne hay that she was getting, as well as the rougher pasture. And my desire to feed her was so strong that I literally had to sit myself down a couple of days and journal about why I was not going to feed this horse, because I had to stick to my own advice to make sure that I hadn't done something really dumb and told people to do something that wasn't going to work. Anyway, we got to month number 2 and I was quite relieved. I was then able to add some fibers, so some beet pulp and some copper meal and some lupin hulls went into her diet. But the cool thing has been, we've had a lay now for going on just over 18 months, and she put weight on. And in fact, we just weighed her. They got their teeth done last week. And so we weighed her, and it was funny. I said to Dr. Doug, my vet, I said, look at us go. It was the 22nd of May. And when I looked up their body weights in my phone, I was like, oh, look, we did them on exactly the same day last year. So I had a weight exactly 12 months after. And she had put on 30 kilos since her weighing last year. And I think she'd put on like 15 to 20 kilos from when we had first got her. So she's put on best part of 50 kilos since she's been with us. And she now weighs pretty much dot on 600 kilograms for a 16-3 hand thoroughbred. And at no time that she's been with us has she been on any more than 2 kilograms of hard feed per day. And she was only fed grain-based feeds for about, 4 weeks of that time. The rest of her weight gain has been on pasture and hay and small amounts of what I call the alternate fibers, so your beets and copper meal and lupin hulls and lupins have used with her. But if I hadn't stuck to my own feeding rules in those early stages and had gone and poured a whole lot more grain into her gut, all I would have done is maintain the population of microbes in her gut that had been diminished essentially when she was in race training. So the cool thing with the lay was we actually took a fecal sample on the first day that we got her, and then we tracked it over the first 10 months of her being with us. And I could see from time, like from day 1 until day 30, we did have a small improvement in the number of species of microbes in her gut. But from day 1 to month 5, it was huge. Her increase in microbes over that time, in diversity of microbes over that time, was massive. And you could see that in her. You could see that she, over that 5-month period, she just started to do better on the same pasture, the same hay, And it's been such a rewarding experience to take it off the track through that process myself, all the while panicking that I had been giving people the wrong advice the whole time. But now she is in a paddock. She does have a big shelter shed that she will come in under if it's raining, but she's unrugged. We've just been it's rained a lot in the last few weeks, so it's actually vivid green when I look out my window today. But if you'd seen this place 2 weeks ago, it was dead brown. There was no green grass, and they still had plenty of pasture in their paddock, but the quality was very, very low. And she had been in work and unfortunately went lame, so she hasn't been in work for the last few weeks, but she had been in decent work getting ready for an inter-schools competition, and she was still only on maybe 1.5 kilos, not even that, 1 kilo of hard feed per day. I find it hard to add it up because there's lots of different things, there's lupins and beet pulp and copper meal and things, trying to just keep ingredient diversity in her diet, but very little feed and some loosened, really good quality loosened hay, but say maybe 2 kilos every day. And that was it. She was maintaining her weight and her muscle beautifully on that. So all of that to say, it is so worth putting in. I guess it feels like the hard yards early in a horse's weight gain journey, and sitting on your hands, trying not to want a result too quickly, because if you can spend the time getting your horse's hindgut set up so that it is absolute powerhouse for pulling the energy out of the forage that you are feeding and giving it to your horse, and not letting that energy go through the gut undigested and just ending up as expensive manure, you will have a horse that for the long term, they will be able to maintain weight on a largely forage-based diet. And you're not going to have a horse that you're going to have to feed kilograms of grain-based feed to, because their hindgut never got a chance to repopulate itself back with the fibre-loving microbes. So I really can't stress how important it is to get your horse's hindgut healthy. There are a bunch of podcast episodes on their hindgut. I think they start at episode number 9 with the wonderful Dr. Belinda from EquiGI, who can test your horse's hindgut microbial population if you're interested in knowing where your horse's hindgut is for any reason. And it is a super handy tool in lots of situations. But I interview Belinda in episode 9 and we talk all things hindgut, which is a really fascinating conversation. And then the 2 episodes following that are talking about feeding for a healthy hindgut. So do go back and check those out, and that will give you the finer details of doing this. But in summary, what you want to do to get your horse's hindgut up to full functioning capacity, first thing is feed lots of forage. And lots of forage for horses on weight gain diets would be 24/7 access to pasture, or an absolute minimum of 2% of body weight of hay per day. So 2% of body weight would be 10 kilograms of hay for a 500 kilogram horse, or if you speak in pounds, it's 22 pounds for an 1,100 pound horse. That is your minimum that you want to feed. Or, of course, if you're doing a combination of pasture and hay, then an appropriate combination of pasture and hay. Hey, tiny detour. If feeding your horse feels confusing, I want you to know that's not a you problem. The equine nutrition industry is genuinely messy. Conflicting advice, clever marketing, and a lot of noise. My Happy Horse cuts through all of it. It's a nutrition app that helps you build a personalised diet for your specific horse, based on science. Not guesswork, not trends, not what someone in a Facebook group told you. Visit myhappy.horse or grab it from the App Store. All right, let's keep going. One little thing I will just mention here as an aside is that if we feed too much to horses that we want to gain weight, we also end up reducing the digestion of forage and fibre in their hindgut as well, because the digestion of the fermentation, so digestion of fibre happens via a process of fermentation. The bacteria and fungi essentially eat the fibre, they ferment it, and then they put out the volatile fatty acids, which are the compounds that your horse then absorbs and uses them as a source of energy. But for the microbes to do that work, it actually takes quite a while, and we want the hay to be sitting around in the hindgut for long time, like 72 hours or something, I think it is, that feed stays in a horse's hindgut. But if you start to feed too much, so if you, and in my experience, this is not documented anywhere, this is just what I've learnt observing horses for 2.5 decades eating, is that once we go over about 3% of body weight of feed intake per day, we start to lose efficiency of digestion. And that happens simply because if a horse is eating, like this is 15 kilograms of hay for a 500 kilogram horse, if they're eating any more than that, the sheer bulk of feed that is moving through their gastrointestinal tract is just going to speed everything up. So instead of having a leisurely lay around of 72 hours in your horse's hindgut getting fermented, the hay may stay in there. I'm just going to make up numbers, but it may only stay in there for 12 to 24 hours, which means that you're going to have a whole lot of fermentation and digestion that hasn't happened because the forage got evicted from the hindgut before it could be fermented and before the bacteria and fungi were able to extract all of the energy out of the fibre and give it to your horse. So there's a balance here. Don't push them too hard. Don't think that just feeding more and more is what is going to work. If you have got a horse that you're trying to put weight on and you're feeding more than 3% of body weight in forage per day, have a think about actually pulling that back, feeding them less. And if they're the type of horse that absolutely hoovers hay and, will eat it very, very quickly and then is standing around doing not very much, do put at least some of it in small hole hay nets so that you can spread their forage intake out over a 24-hour period, because we don't want them standing around for periods of time without access to hay. So for horses that are hungry and they're eating a lot and they're still not gaining weight, just do go and weigh what you're feeding them in terms of hay. And if it is too much, then restrict it back and then use hay nets to slow them down. On the flip side, that is another aside. My brain keeps going off in different directions here, but I was helping one of My Happy Horse app members a couple of weeks ago with an off the track who didn't want to eat grass hay. So this is your classic off the track that it was fussy about its grass hay, was eating the loosened hay, but then its owner was then feeding it a lot of hard feed, a lot of fortified feed to get the energy into it and to have it, feeling satisfied and like it was full. And just in conversation, she said something about the grassy hay being in a hay net. And I went, maybe take it out of the hay net, because if that horse is not really that motivated to go and eat grassy hay, and then you also make it difficult for them to eat that grassy hay, particularly if it's a small hole hay net, then it's even harder for them to go, I might go and eat that grassy hay, because some off the tracks are not great at eating a lot of grassy forages if they haven't had a lot of grassy forages in their diet. So anyone in the USA is probably going, what on earth are you talking about? Or Japan, what on earth are you talking about? Because grassy forages are so common there. But there is parts of Australia where it's actually really hard to buy grassy hay. It's so easy to buy alfalfa, and it's really hard to find good quality grassy hay. So sometimes racehorses come out of training and they're not quite sure what that grassy hay stuff is. But if you do have a horse that is pernickety about its hay, and especially about its grassy hay in the early stages of being off the track, or any horse for any reason, so you might have an old horse that is just not that fussed on the grassy hay that you are providing, don't make it hard for them to eat it. Just give it to them somewhere that is really easy for them to access, preferably in a head down position. So if you can just put it on the ground, that's ideal, because they can eat it in the most natural position and it's easy for them to pick it up and consume it. You're not making them work for it. So total aside to what I was talking about, I was just going quickly through all of the things that you need to do to improve hindgut health. And the first one was feed lots of forage. And then I got distracted off on all of those other things, which hopefully are helpful. But let's get back on track here. So the next thing to do for a healthy hindgut is feed a variety of forage. So the whole premise for this is if you are providing a variety of forage, you will also support microbe diversity. And Dr. Belinda talks about microbes and the importance of microbe diversity in terms of thinking about all of the different microbes as being like Swiss Army knives, but all different Swiss Army knives. So fibers are really complex things to actually cut up and digest. So the bacteria and fungi need all sorts of tools. So you can think about it as, some of them have saws and scissors and maybe, chisels, and others have very sharp knives and serrated blades. And, there's lots and lots of different tools that the microbes need to break down fungi. And the more diverse the population of microbes we can get into the hindgut, the more cutting tools we essentially end up with that can be used to digest and break down fibre. And then your horse has got a much better chance of actually being able to extract the energy out of the fibres via the microbes that they keep as their little pets in their hindgut, compared to a horse that's got either not very many fibre fermenting microbes or not a very diverse population of fibre fermenting microbes. So that was one thing we saw with Alay, was that the number of different microbes in her hindgut increased massively in the first 5 months that we had her, which would mean that she was then much better able to actually digest the forages that were in her diet. You can also bring in alternate fibres. So I've mentioned them a few times already, things like sugar beet pulp, copper meal, hemp hulls, lupin hulls, or any other safe source of fibre. Do be wary of soybean hulls, because if they have not been properly heat treated, they actually have potential to cause weight loss. I've mentioned a few times previously in the podcast horses that were in an equestrian stable in Sydney, and the poor owner was at her wit's end. She had beautifully balanced diet. She was using FeedXL at the time, and so as part of my role at FeedXL, she'd asked me to come down and look at these horses' diets, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me why they looked like tents. They had no top line, their shoulders were skinny, they had no muscle over their rump. And then I realised that she was feeding essentially a raw soybean hull to these horses, and that raw soybean hull would have been with its active trypsin inhibitor, so it actually blocks protein digestion. So these horses were having to use their own muscle protein to keep their body running, to do all of the important things that you need to do with protein. They weren't getting any out of their diet because the soybean hulls were stopping them from digesting it. So they were having to take the muscle from their own body to keep themselves alive, essentially. And over time, they were losing lots and lots of muscle. So do be really careful with those, because they can actually send you backwards as opposed to helping you put condition on horses. If you are going to feed grain, then you must feed controlled quantities of grain. My preferred maximum is a 0.5 kilogram of grain per 100 kilograms of body weight, or a 0.5 pound of grain per 100 pounds of body weight, because if you're feeding at or less than that amount, you've got a much better chance of having a healthy hindgut, because you're much less likely to be pushing starch into the hindgut and causing that rapid fermentation that will then shut down your fibre fermenting microbes. And then also only feed well-cooked grains. So with the exception of oats, every grain that you feed needs to be cooked. And by cooked, I mean extruded or properly micronized or well steam flaked or popped. They need to be cooked so that the starch is digested in the small intestine and doesn't end up in the hindgut. And there is an entire podcast episode on that. I think it's episode 54, something around there, that talks about the importance of feeding cooked grains and what happens if you feed the raw or poorly cooked grains, and its negative impact, like it'll really, really negatively impact fibre fermentation, which means you will stop horses from gaining weight because they are not able to extract their energy from their forages. So for horses who are coming down off high grain diets, so again, classic off the tracks, I try to keep diets for those horses. So my recommendation is to keep diets for those horses grain-free for about 6 months, because then it gives the gut the best possible chance of getting its resident fibre fermenting microbes back. And letting them build up healthy populations and also diverse populations, so that from that point on, that horse is able to extract maximum energy out of its forages. And then your forages will do so much of the work of putting weight on those horses. So this really is what lays the foundation for effective weight gain diets. And it takes some time, it takes some patience, but ultimately what it is going to give you is a horse that can maintain weight long term. So we can, like I said, we can pack weight on horses in the short term. if we really wanted to for some reason. But if you want long-term weight gain that's not going to yo-yo up and down, depending on what hard feed you're giving your horse, then just spend the time and get their hindgut healthy, get it to the point where it is extracting everything it possibly can in terms of energy out of the forages that you're feeding for your horse. And you will just see that horse will maintain weight a lot easier and will maintain weight in the long term. Okay, I could talk about hindgut health endlessly, but let's move on to step number 3, because the other steps are important. And steps 3, 4, and 5 are a little bit chicken and egg. So they can all happen at the same time. I guess if we use a fortified feed, you'll actually do all 3 of these steps at the same time. But I'll go through them one by one. Just keep that in mind, that they're not necessarily happening at different times. So your third step is to get the diet balanced. And diet balance is important for so many reasons. And this is a big part of the reason why I've spent 20 plus years building software to allow people to, and myself, to be able to calculate diets properly. Because if we don't have diets that are balanced, and balanced in terms of macro ingredients, so your forage is balanced with the amount of concentrate you have in the diet, and also on a micro level, all the nutrients your horse needs supplied in the correct daily amount, and are they supplied in the right ratio to one another. So there's 2 parts of getting a diet balanced, but it's incredibly important. We've sort of talked about ingredients on the macro level. So if you've got the wrong ratio of forage to concentrate, and particularly grain-based concentrate, wrong, you'll end up with a horse that doesn't have a hindgut that can ferment forage effectively. And we've just spent the last little while talking about that. So it's really, really important to make sure that you've got a lot more forage in the diet than you do grain. Like I said, my preference would be don't go above 0.5% of body weight in grain or grain-based feeds per day, and make sure that you have at least 2%, but no more than 3% of the diet in forages and hays. And the My Happy Horse app calculates all of this for you. So it will show you when you're in the green zone for both of those things, or if you're pushing into an orange, and if you're in a red zone for either of those, so that you can make sure that the diet is balanced up properly on a macro level. And then on a micro level, some nutrients are actually so tied up with weight gain that if you have a deficiency, you will not be able to put weight on that horse. So a couple of examples are long-term deficiency of vitamin E will actually cause muscle loss. So you'll be in this situation where you're trying to put weight on a horse, but because the horse is so vitamin E deficient, it's actually losing muscle on losing weight. And unless you fix that deficiency first, you're not going to be able to put weight back on that horse. You have to fix the deficiency. And really the only way you're going to know that deficiency is there is if you analyse the diet. You can test vitamin E levels in the blood. It's, I think, maybe plasma vitamin E. You'd have to check that with your vet. But you can test, and it is a really good idea if you suspect that your horse might be vitamin E, to see what level of vitamin E deficiency they have, and 2, so that you can check at a later date to make sure that your supplementation is actually being effective. If you are fighting against a deficiency like that, though, it doesn't matter what you feed in the diet, unless you fix that deficiency as part of your weight gain diet, then your horse is really going to struggle. And in fact, in that situation, I would say is not going to put on weight. And then as another example, zinc is critical for muscle building. So if your horse is zinc deficient, and it is very common to see zinc deficiency because a lot of forages are really low in zinc. So if you're not actually fortifying your horse's diet properly and adding some zinc in there, it is really common to see zinc deficiency. But if you are trying to put weight and particularly muscle on a horse and they're not getting enough zinc, then that will likely start to reduce their ability to build muscle and gain weight as well. So super important to run a full diet analysis. If you are trying to put weight on your horse, I'd really recommend you go and grab the My Happy Horse nutrition app. It will allow you to say what body condition your horse currently is and what body condition you want it to be, and it will adjust energy requirement for that horse based on the need for weight gain. And then you will be able to see what the energy intake is and whether it is high enough to support that weight gain. And you'll also be able to make sure that all of your horse's nutrient requirements for things like zinc and vitamin E are actually met. And it will show you too what your horse's gut health score is. So you'll get a sense for whether the diet that you are planning to feed or may already be feeding is actually supporting their gut health and supporting weight gain, or whether it's actually doing damage to your horse's gut health and potentially pushing weight gain backwards. Or at least stopping your horse from gaining any weight. So it is super important to make sure that the diet is balanced. There's lots of different ways you can balance diets. And again, this is part of the reason why I've been building software for so long, because there is so many ways you can balance a horse's diet. But using really good quality balancer pellet or vitamin and mineral supplement or a fortified feed will bring in a lot of the nutrients that you need. And then if your horse needs any specific additional nutrients, then there's lots of supplements. So for example, if they need more vitamin E, then you can add a vitamin E supplement, or a human vitamin E capsule is something that a lot of people, including me, do use when we need to top up vitamin E levels in a horse's diet. But all of that will be really visible when you put what you are currently feeding your horse into the app. There is a 7-day free trial, and first horse is always free, so you can grab it from the App Store and enter your horse and what you're feeding, and all of a sudden you'll be able to see exactly what's in your horse's diet, which is really a very cool way to manage your horse's nutrition. So step number 4 is to add high-quality protein. And high-quality protein is so incredibly important for a horse needing to gain weight, because normally we're not looking for just condition. Occasionally we'll have horses that, they're well-muscled and we just want to put some condition on them. But a lot of the time for horses with weight gain, we're wanting to put condition as well as muscle onto them. And to put muscle, to allow a horse to build muscle, we have to provide them with high quality protein. So protein is not just protein. It is built from around 20 different amino acid building blocks. And 10 of those amino acids we call the non-essential amino acids, because if a horse needs them, it will make them for themselves. But the other 10 are the essential amino acids, and they're called essential because they're actually essential in the diet. The horse can't make them for themselves, and in fact, we can't as humans make them for ourselves either. So they're essential in our diet. And of those 10, there are 3 that we consider the most limiting amino acids, and they are called lysine, methionine, and threonine. And when a horse is building muscle, it has to build muscle fibers with the exact combination of amino acids that those muscle fibers have. And part of muscle fiber is going to be these limiting amino acids, lysine, methionine, and threonine. And we call them the most limiting amino acids because they're the amino acids that a horse is most likely to run out of during the muscle building process. And what happens if they run out of one of those amino acids is that the muscle building process has to stop until they are given another supply of those amino acids through their diet. But it's essentially, I think about it like a bricklayer trying to build a brick wall. If the bricklayer runs out of bricks, and they can no longer build a brick wall, and they have to wait until they are supplied with more bricks before they can start building again. So if you've got a horse that needs to put on muscle and you're not feeding it a high quality protein that gives them a really good supply of these limiting essential amino acids, their muscle building process will start and then stop and then start and then stop, like a bricklayer that's constantly running out of bricks because there's not a good supply of bricks. And if we can instead feed horses on weight gain diets with really high quality protein, we get them out of this situation where muscle building has to start and stop all the time, and they're actually able to build decent amounts of muscle without being limited by these essential amino acids or a lack of supply of these essential amino acids. I have recorded an entire podcast on protein quality. So if you want to dig into that one a little bit more, go back and listen to episode number 52. Protein is not just protein. And it goes a whole episode going through what I just covered in a couple of minutes in a lot of detail, and it is worth, it's one part of horse nutrition that's really worth understanding well, because when you understand protein quality and then you're able to select feeds and forages based on what a specific horse needs from a protein quality perspective, you're able to make much better choices around what will best support them in what you're trying to achieve with them. So in this case, we're trying to achieve weight gain, and we want to be looking for these high quality proteins so that we support muscle building the best we possibly can. So what is a high quality protein? Very briefly, so soybean is the highest quality plant protein available to us. So when we are wanting to create weight gain diets, I will look for feeds and balancer pellets that have got soybean meal as their primary protein source, because I want the essential amino acids that are available in soybean. It's the richest plant source of essential amino acids that we can access. And then depending on where you are in the world, you could use whey protein as a source of amino acids. It's incredibly high quality protein. It's got lots and lots of the essential amino acids, including the three most limiting, the lysine, methionine, and threonine. And then it's really rich in leucine, which is the one amino acid that actually switches the muscle building process on. So it's a handy one to keep up your sleeve. There are lots of different protein and amino acid supplements that are possible to use as well, but do be conscious when you are putting together a weight gain diet that there is some high quality protein in there so you are supporting muscle growth. Before I go on to the last step, which is adding high energy ingredients, I do want to just mention here a caution in that weight gain diets will affect behavior. So you do need to be really careful depending on your horse and depending on your level of experience for a rider and depending on what you're looking for in terms of behavior from a horse. You do need to be really careful to understand that when you start feeding horses for weight gain, you will increase their level of energy in their behavior. So horses are funny creatures in that they will express the amount of energy they're consuming in their diet through their behavior. And when we have horses on weight gain diets, if we're riding them, they often have a bit of excess energy that they want to offload somewhere, and usually when they're under saddle. So do be aware of that and keep yourselves safe. Always the best option for weight gain diets is to allow the horse some time off before you start riding it, in the case of off the tracks, or if you have got a competition horse that needs to gain some weight, give them some time off and put them on a high energy diet, because it's much safer for you, but it's also a lot fairer to them that you're not expecting them to behave under saddle when you're actually feeding them so much energy that they feel like they're jumping out of their own skin. It's just a lot nicer and it's a lot safer. We did this with the lay. We knew we were going to be away for a few weeks on a holiday up in North Queensland, cattle mustering. And so we adapted her to some higher energy feeds. And then for the time that we were away, I had her on those higher energy feeds, and she did put on weight while we were away. And then when I came back, I got a very good demonstration of how high energy diets affect behavior. So she's dead quiet for an off the track. She's so calm, so quiet. And Tamaya came back from the first ride after we got home from holiday saying to me, "Less energy, please, Mum," because she'd actually read, which is not something that she had done prior to that, and was bouncing around full racehorse mode. So we took those really high energy feeds out of her diet, and her behavior just came back to where we would normally expect it to be. So do be careful if you're feeding for weight gain, and particularly if you're not a super confident rider, do just be aware that you can turn a horse into a fire-breathing dragon really easily when you're feeding them for weight gain. So on that note, step number 5 is to add high energy ingredients. So just to reiterate something that I already said, you might achieve steps 3, which was balance the diet, step 4, which was add high quality protein, and step 5, high energy ingredients, all at the same time if you use a really well balanced and high quality fortified feed. So a fortified feed that's got the right balance of vitamins and minerals for your horse and contains high quality protein and also digestible high energy ingredients. So they might all collapse into one step for you, but if you have done what I will often do, in that I'll use either a balancer pellet or a vitamin and mineral supplement to balance the nutrients in the diet, I will add soybean and often lupins, which, sorry, rest of the world, they're an Australian luxury. I don't know how you feed horses without them, but I use lupins in nearly every diet because I love them so much. So I'll add that as my high quality protein sources. And then when I need extra energy for any horse, then I'll add some of these high energy ingredients. So that's for my own horses, just because that's how I like to feed. When I'm working with race horses, they're nearly all on fortified feeds. So we bring the vitamin and mineral balance, the high quality protein and the high energy ingredients in at the same time. So it's not three separate steps, it's all the same step happening at the same time. I hope that makes sense. It makes sense in my head, but it is Friday, so who knows what's going on in there. Adding high energy ingredients, again, we need to, when you get to this step, so for the off the track process, spending the first 6 months just getting their hindgut right, getting their hindgut microbes healthy and build up their populations and build up their diversity. What you don't want to do is then go, okay, now I'll add high energy ingredients and go and drop something into the diet that is actually going to then damage that hindgut health and put you back to square one. Please don't do that. If you've done the hard work of getting the hindgut healthy, then make really careful selections of the high energy ingredients you're going to use. And the first one on the list is just feed a high quality forage. So this is where I'm at the moment, heading into, it's not really been a very cold autumn, and we're only a couple of days off heading into winter as I record this. And Alay and old Breezy, they're not losing weight, but I think if I don't give them a little bit of extra feed, when the pasture was really poor quality, they had potential to be losing weight, especially as it got colder. And so all I did with their diet is I resisted my temptation to go and give them some sort of bagged feed, and I started feeding them just more lucerne hay. So they were really only getting the lucerne chaff that was in their bucket feeds of an evening, and they might have gotten Alay was getting lucerne hay the days that she was being ridden. But to increase their energy in both of their diets, I've got beautiful lucerne hay here at the moment, and so they were just getting 2 kilograms of lucerne hay each per day, and that was enough to increase the energy of that diet enough to have them maintain weight. So if you've got horses that are needing to gain weight and they are on reasonably poor quality forage, so if you've got dry native pastures or lower quality sort of stemmy, stalky hay, try and find a hay that you can bring into that diet to increase the energy content. So a much higher quality hay. It does a couple of things. It keeps the forage content of the diet really high. If you, like me, are bringing a legume into a grass-based pasture, then you get that fibre diversity. So there's lots of benefits of feeding additional energy as high-quality forage, and it is less likely to affect behaviour. And that's a really important one when a horse is being ridden, especially when you are putting your daughter on that horse. So I'm really conscious of behaviour with Alay because Tamaya rides her, obviously, and I want to keep her safe. So, that's my go-to. And even for me, as a professional nutritionist, I sometimes have to give myself a little talking to stop myself from going, oh, cool, I get to go and feed a feed now. I just have to give them more hay. The next thing you can do is add or increase the high-energy fibres. So the super fibres, as we sometimes call them, like sugar beet pulp and lupin hulls, they contain on a weight-for-weight basis about the same amount of energy as oats, but they're fibre, not cereal grains. So they're a really lovely source of high energy because they're still fermented naturally in the hindgut as a horse. That's, the most natural way for a horse to digest its feed. And again, a little bit less likely to affect behaviour, but they're high in energy. So they're very, very capable of helping a horse put on weight. You can add oils, again, very safe energy source. They do have the added benefit of being very dense. So if you've got a horse that is not a very good eater, doesn't like to eat big feeds, then you can get a lot of energy into them using oils. Oils contain around 3 times the amount of energy as an equivalent volume of oats. So they're really very, very rich in energy. They're safe because horses can digest oils really well, and just with the caution to introduce them slowly. So for an average size 500 kilogram or 1,100 pound horse, I would start with no more than 60 mils per day, and then only increase it by about 60 mils every 5 to 7 days over time. And you can feed horses a litre or more of oil per day. I've never done that. I've never taken horses up to that amount, but you can feed up to 2 cups, so up to 500 mils per day very safely, as long as you introduce it to their diet nice and slowly to give their small intestine the heads up that it's going to need to digest quite a lot of oil, and therefore it needs to start making and releasing a lot of the enzymes in the small intestine that will then break down the oil for them. And then the last one is to add well-cooked cereal grains if you need to. So cereal grains, a lot of people get very scared of cereal grains, and it's with good reason. So there are lots of horses that can't have the starch that cereal grains contain safely because they have either a metabolic condition or they might have the PSSM form of tying up, and they need to have grain-free diets. And the other reason why we should be very scared of cereal grains is because if we feed the wrong cereal grain or we feed the wrong amount of cereal grain, a lot of the starch that they contain will end up in their hindgut. And it creates this situation of one step forward with weight gain, because in adding the cereal grain in, yes, you are putting more energy into the diet, but then you will also have 2 steps back, because you are going to end up with the grain in the large intestine, and then that will wipe out a lot of your horse's ability to ferment fibre. So you've put more energy in as grain, but you've essentially taken a whole lot of energy out because you've now stopped your horse from being able to effectively digest its forages. So you have to be really, really careful with cereal grain. They work beautifully when you use them well. So if you use a very well cooked grain, and in some situations for some horses you should feed it with digestive enzymes, because there are some horses that don't have very good capacity to digest starch because they don't have much of an enzyme called amylase in their small intestine. So if you do have a horse that can have cereal grain and they just don't seem to do well on them, you could try there's many gut health supplements that have got digestive enzymes added to them. Make sure that there is some amylase in there, because that's really the one that horses are looking for. That's the one that will help them the most. And just don't feed too much. So even if you get a really digestible grain, if you then feed too much of that, you are going to force a lot of starch into the hindgut, and you will negatively affect starch digestion. And if you haven't listened to episode 54 of the Happy Horse Nutrition podcast, where I have a chat with Zach and we talk about prepping thoroughbred yearlings, he actually talks about how they've gone from feeding 8 kilograms, 7.5 to 8 kilograms of grain per day to a yearling, which was pretty common practice, down to 3.5 to 4 kilograms of grain per day, which is still quite a lot. And Zach, if you're listening, I reckon we could go lower than that if we do it well. But anyway, there's your challenge. I'll just throw it out there to you. But they halved the amount of grain they were feeding and got as good results in weight gain and muscle development. So it's a really good example of that 1 step forward, 2 steps back when you feed too much grain. So use grains for sure. When they're fed well, when they're cooked and they're fed in small amounts, and they're very safe, and they will do a very good job of weight gain for you. I think the showy crowd have known this for years, because boiled barley has been a staple in show horse diets for as long as I can remember. And the reason why it does such a good job is because it's so digestible in the small intestine. That's about it for weight gain diets. There's lots of complexity, of course, depending on specific horses and ingredients you've got access to and what the horse's situation is, why it lost weight in the first place. But really, if you can follow those 5 steps, so first of all, figure out why the horse lost weight, and then make sure that you are spending the time to get that hindgut absolutely cranking in terms of what it can do with fibre digestion, and making sure that it is extracting as much energy as possible from the forages that your horse is eating for you, so that that is forming the foundation of the weight gain diet. Make sure the diet is balanced, and we would love you to use the My Happy Horse nutrition app, and it will show you so quickly and so simply what is in your horse's diet and what is missing from your horse's diet, and we'll take all the messing around out of trying to figure out what to feed, because you can just see in full colour what is at the right levels and at the right balance and what's not, so you can fix it. And then the fourth step, make sure you have high quality protein in there, and then add additional high energy ingredients. If you can follow that process, most horses will put on weight really easily. Do, as a last little tip, do just make sure that you are weighing the amount of hay you feed if your horse is on a hay-based diet. So I remember a conversation not that long ago in the last few years with a beautiful off-the-track trainer in Queensland, and she had a huge off-the-track. It was well over 17 hands and on an adjustment property, and she couldn't figure out why she couldn't get weight on him. And looking at his diet looked good. She had good feeds in there. There was forage. There was a variety of forage. He'd had time to, get his hindgut working properly and all of those things. But what we eventually figured out was that the amount of hay he was getting just wasn't enough for him, because he was a big boy. So, at say 650 kilos, he's needing 12, 13 kilos of hay per day, and he wasn't getting nearly that amount. So grab a set of luggage scales, or sometimes people use fish scales, and stick the hay that you're feeding in a hay net or an old chaff bag or something that you can put hay in to weigh it, and just weigh your hay to make sure you are actually feeding enough hay for your horse, because if you don't feed them enough forage, they won't put on weight. So I really hope that helps you. When you do take the time to do weight gain diets well, you really will be rewarded with a horse that will gain weight and then maintain it long term on very little supplementary feed, which is much better for your bank account. And it is much more satisfying when you can get a horse to that point where they will maintain weight on a largely forage-based diet. Obviously, if they're in pretty hard work, then you will need to feed them some supplementary feed. But even then, if you've got them in really hard work, if their hindgut is really healthy, you will have to feed them a lot less supplementary feed than if you have a performance horse with a really unhealthy hindgut. And remember that hindgut is pumping energy out into their muscles 24/7, which makes for brilliant performance horses, because they've got this constant supply of energy coming out into their muscles. So weight gain diets done well are not only going to give you a fatter horse, they're going to give you a horse with a healthy gut and calmer behaviour. They will be happier. They will have better immune function. They will have better hindgut vitamin production. They will have healthier hooves. They will have improved performance. There's so many reasons why we should do weight gain diets well. Done poorly, where we just dump a whole heap of grain into a horse's diet and don't worry so much about the forage, we'll end up with a whole host of problems. So yeah, I'm a big fan of slow and steady, and you will have a horse long term who is really healthy and happy and in really good condition with beautiful muscling, and you will be a very, very happy horse owner, which then makes all of us here at My Happy Horse happy as well. And on that happy little note, thank you very much for being here, and I look forward to catching you in the next episode. If you'd like to know more about the My Happy Horse nutrition app and how it can help you create personalised nutrition for your horse, grab the download link straight from the show notes, or head over to myhappy.horse. And while you're there, check out Dr. Nerida AI. That's me in AI format, ready to answer your horse nutrition questions even in the middle of the night. Thank you for being here, and I will catch you in the next episode.